What's going on, everybody? Thank you for joining. My name's Eric, and I'm the host of Alamo City Agenda. where we interview candidates from a non-biased perspective. And so let's not mess around. Let's get started. Our first guest today is our guest today is Mr. LaHood. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning. I'm doing, or good afternoon now. I'm doing well. Yourself, bro?
Good, good, good. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's an open-ended question. I mean, what do you want to know?
Everything. Spill the beans. Not just like.
Uh, born, born and raised in San Antonio. Went to school here. My family's from here. My pop's been a lawyer for 50 some odd years. Um, and I've been a lawyer for 15 years. Got married in 2017. I have four children. I have a 15-year-old girl. She's beautiful and she's boy crazy, which is dangerous.
Oh man.
And I've got three under four. I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old. So aside from the campaign and a busy law practice, my hands are pretty full.
Yeah, yeah. How do you keep everything balanced? Because that's really a big struggle is to keep that balance, right? Especially during campaigns and your family and everything. So, what do you do to keep that balance?
Probably the biggest thing is structure. Is just having, I hate to say it, but just having order and, calendaring. I mean, we know 8 o'clock, we're going out to school. The kids are off by 9, into the office by 9:15, usually working through lunch. And then, we're already at lunch planning, or around noontime, we're planning what's going on in the afternoon, dinner, picking the kids, whether it's CYO ball or my daughter's in club volleyball or whatever it may be, and just really have to look ahead. The bachelor days of just flying by the night are long, long gone.
So so it sounds like you're a normal dude.
I hope so.
Because a lot of the times, we look at politicians, right? It's like, oh, they're so different than all of us, but reality, not all that different, right?
No,
So,
man. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. I mean, the reality is this is, I people ask me, because my dad was a judge and my brother obviously was the DA. And people have asked me over the years, like, when are you going to run or what are you going to run for something? And I say, not no, but hell no. I'm never going to run for office. I
don't
want,
ever say no.
yeah, kidding, man. I mean, all I wanted to do was work and provide for my family and then spend my free time with my family, hunt, fish, or go out or whatever. And, unfortunately, the last couple of years are what they are. And Bear County is, trending where it's trending, that it kind of forced me to do something about it.
So, when you say that trending was trending, are you talking about with what's happening with what the current DA has been saying that he's not going to go after you know, certain items of to trial, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and so it's good for business when drug cases or family. I mean, not assault cases or whatever are getting dismissed, or you're getting great offers for your clients. That's fine and dandy for the back end, but that's not good for our community. And at the end of the day, it's not good for my family or any of our families. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, one of the biggest things that blew my mind, one of the reasons why I got into it was, and I'm sure people have heard about like fentanyl, and everyone knows about heroin and crack cocaine and meth and whatnot. But, you know, immediately after Joe took office, he quarter gram or less, didn't matter what the facts were, not a single type of those cases was going to get prosecuted. They're going to get dismissed. They're going to get rejected. Those are the most addictive, the most deadly and dangerous drugs. My uncle, God rest his soul, went to Vietnam and came back, like a lot of combat veterans, came back troubled and ultimately became a heroin addict in and out of prison and ultimately died in prison. I mean, you can't help people dealing with those problems by not getting your hands involved to help them out. I mean, if you just dismiss them, you're just making the problem worse. You're not helping people. You're not helping our community. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I don't want to go on a rant, but yeah, that's one of the things.
Yeah. I mean, so with that, I mean, is there anything that you can do to help with the whole Bear County, you know, prison system. Like it's just so bad that there's so much turnover. You know, why do you think that is from a DA's perspective?
Well, that's kind of a mouthful of a question, but part of it's the jail and the sheriff's office and the commissioners and the county. That's one issue, and that's an administrative with regards to the housing and how they're going to handle that administratively. With regard to the DA's office, the part that we have a role in is how efficiently and how effectively we're running in the office to handle this caseload. I've been saying it from day one, generally speaking, a government entity that treats something like it's somebody else's money or something else's problem isn't going to be efficient. But if you treat it like a business, which it is, the largest law firm in Bexar County, and you understand that leadership has to come from the front, you have to lead by example, and you have to mentor and, educate and guide your staff to make sure that they're efficient and effective to be processing it. The numbers have doubled on the books, and that's not even including the numbers that aren't on the books from the cases that are just being dismissed, carte blanche. And those two combinations between the overflow, COVID didn't help, but we were already backlogged a little bit before then. In all fairness, some of that's COVID, but
2000, right, or something like that.
Yeah, I believe it was the first, maybe like December of 19, but I think it hit the States in like March of 19 or March of 20 or something like that. But, in all fairness, that's not this administration's fault, but it is part of the problem. But it's not an excuse. I mean, the reality is poor leadership adds to this problem. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you have to own it and figure out a solution proactively. If you see a problem and it's not getting better, to do the same thing is insane to me. I mean, you have to then think outside the box and figure out what do we have to change to be proactive, to be getting at a solution.
So what do you think would be a solution, or what would you like to implement if you get, voted
in? For the DA's office, you mean?
Yes.
Short version is the way I envision it. It's a twofold process. One, there has to be an ideology change or a philosophy change there. And the three biggest things I can think of is, the DA's office is the law enforcement officer in the county. And for the elected DA to be, in suggesting or, helping out to defund the police or advocating for that or severing ties with law enforcement is insane. I mean, even aside from being the DA, I would think most of us understand that law enforcement is a dangerous job. It's a necessary job, and the men and women that do it have a very difficult job. And we have to work with them and help them, not try to sever that. The other part is the law enforcement work the cases up that the DA's office prosecutes. And so, it's not surprising that we're seeing a lot of dismissals and we're seeing a lot of weak pleas, because when you cut ties with your other half, how are you going to operate efficiently? So law enforcement and reestablishing and supporting that relationship has to be key. That's number one. Number two, and you've already kind of mentioned it earlier, is you have to enforce the law. I don't care if you're conservative or liberal. Your personal opinion doesn't matter. Like, your job is to enforce the law, period. Now, you have some discretion on how to apply that, but you have to enforce all the laws. And, without an agenda, without a political agenda, without some sort of selfish motive, you just have to enforce what's on the books. If we want a law change, we have to go do it the right way. You go through the legislators and the legislative branch, not through the judiciary, to do it, backdoor. And the last is the morale. People don't realize, but, the DAs and even law enforcement, they're demoralized. I mean, they're not doing what they signed up for. They're not doing what they, swore an oath for. And we're seeing DAs leave in record numbers, or not DAs, but assistant DAs. Last I checked, I think as of last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, I think there were 24 vacancies of prosecutors here in this office. Wow. Because they're unhappy. So that's the philosophy change that has to change. And then as a practical matter is just empower them. Again, talking about being practical and getting stuff done, these prosecutors will try a case and we give them the power to try it. but then we tie their hands and don't let them have discretion on how to resolve it. Well, they're the ones that are the most involved, right? They're the ones that are in court dealing with the file, dealing with the victim's advocate, dealing with the complainants. They know the facts better than anyone else. Why wouldn't we allow them to work them out reasonably and in the best interest of justice to take care of that? And so all those things together tie their hands, and it jams up the system, in my opinion.
Gotcha. So with like your brother was, and I hate to do the party thing, but you know it is a party kind of deal, right? So we've had two Democrats in the last known positions, right? So what do you feel like you can bring to the table that you can kind of unite the people to say, look, I'm here for you, and it's not just about the party situation? Because people are already gonna probably dismiss you, right? Because you're Republican, right? So how do you plan on navigating that and overcoming that?
Um, it's like you're taking plays out of my playbook here. Uh, you know, I filed in December, and for the last, what is it, 4 or 5 months? I mean, I've been doing what I plan on doing from now to general, which is I've been talking to people that have never voted either conservative or never voted period or never voted for Republican in their lives. With the administration that we have and with the choices we have, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. Like the joke I make is in the old days, we were fighting over maybe more jail or more probation, but we all, valued the same things. I mean, this is a public safety issue. It's a law enforcement issue. It's a actions and consequence. You know what I mean? It's not a Republican issue. And that's what people have been real responsive to is, you don't need to see a commercial or a billboard or an ad telling you what's wrong with their county. We can see it for ourselves. Crime is rampant. That's not like political propaganda. That's fact. We've seen it, in the streets, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, everywhere. I mean, it's a problem. And the reality is that all Joe's fault? No. But again, the DA's job is to seek justice, to hold, criminals accountable, get the predators off the streets and help make our community safe and help make victims whole. And that's not happening. You know what I mean? Like that's, I guess, ultimately that's how you bridge it. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's just this is a safety issue. It's what's best for ourselves, for our community, our loved ones.
Gotcha. There was a question that came up that with the recent passing of the marijuana decriminalization and no knock bans in Austin, how would you treat the crimes here in Bexar County?
What do you mean? Like marijuana?
Right.
I mean, until our state legalizes it, I'm going to enforce it. Now, the DA has discretion, right? So like, I'll use marijuana for an example. Marijuana, it could be a Class B misdemeanor, depending on the weight, Class A misdemeanor, state jail, third degree, second degree, first degree, so on and so forth. And so every classification has a range. Class B misdemeanor up to $2,000 fine, 2 years of probation or deferred adjudication, 6 months in the county jail. And so the DA's office has the discretion on whether or not to allow someone to do pretrial diversion, to do deferred adjudication, to do straight probation. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I just think regardless of what your personal opinion on marijuana is, it's currently illegal. And so unite, petition legislatures, get it legalized. But as the DA, what I would do is look at all the facts, right? Like that's what you have to do. So are we talking about it's a young kid, old? What are the surrounding facts on it? We're not here to try and ruin someone's record or their life or their future. But at the same time, I think it creates a horrible precedent when you tell people, you know what? I personally don't think it's a bad thing, so I'm not going to prosecute it. Well, then what happens when the next person gets in office and they think a different crime is not important or not worth prosecuting? That's not our job. Is to be, judge and executioner, judge, jury, and executioner, as the old saying goes. You know what I mean? Like we swear an oath to uphold the laws.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I see your point. It's also the fact that I think there was that report that Mr. Gonzalez had out that there was a so many marijuana crimes were dismissed. So it just means that more people that in a lot of people's eyes are shouldn't be in jail for marijuana didn't have to be in jail for that, which relieved a lot of stress off the jails. But but you're saying is that regardless of whatever it is, you would stick to whatever the situation was as a per case basis, is what you're saying, like whatever the case may be, and then you would follow through with that and just look at each and every single case kind of thing, or would be
I mean,
most of them it'd be
essentially, the reality is this: is that in Bexar County for the last 20 years, you weren't going to jail realistically because you got arrested for marijuana. You weren't sentenced to jail. I mean, when you get arrested, you get processed, you get magged, you bond out, and get released. But that's not what's jamming up the system. The reality is this: is that there's only two ways of looking at it. So, and not just marijuana, right? So what he ended up doing was like I talked about the fentanyl, like I talked about the heroin, the meth, the crack. An ounce of marijuana or less was being dismissed carte blanche. No matter what the facts were, you could pull it out in front of a cop, didn't matter. And in reality, greater weight was getting dismissed. But the reality is this: is well, that's not relieving anything, is it? I mean, we still see there's backlog, both in the jail and there's backlog in the criminal system. The DA is still dismissing a record number of cases. They're making horrible pleas. They're backtracking left and right. That's not fixing the solution. That's not leadership. That's just saying, oh, let's try and do some kind of quick, fix to make people happy. It sounds good as a soundbite, but it doesn't work. Because at the end of the day, when you tell people that the DA is going to pick and choose what they're going to enforce, it tells people that laws really don't matter. Because it's not just the drugs. It's the criminal trespass, the criminal mischief, unauthorized use of a vehicle, which is stealing a car, or burglary of a vehicle, or elder fraud, or contractor fraud. Like the list goes on and on and on of this slippery slope of what's not getting prosecuted, and there's still a backlog. So that's not fixing it. So what's the solution then?
gotcha. So what is the solution? What do you see? Like what do you believe could be a solution?
There's no magic answer, like no short answer. The solution is you got to roll your sleeves up. You got to get your hands dirty, get in the mix, get in the fight. And that starts with the leadership. Like I said, I'll give you an example. There are some great prosecutors, not all of them have left, but there's some great prosecutors that are still there, all of them. And, not all crimes are equal, right? So I know prosecutors that have been, career-long family violence prosecutors. Well, you don't work up and prove up a family violence case like you would a drug case or a DWI or whatnot. These prosecutors are getting moved around and put in positions of leadership without any guidance of how to run or how to prosecute these types of crimes. And so you're still seeing things getting jammed up. And then at the trial level, one of the biggest things that I keep hearing from prosecutors on cases is, oh, I can't do that, or you go up my chain, or I'm going to get in trouble, or X, Y, and Z. And it's like, get in trouble for what? The law allows you to do it. Here are the facts. You're the one that's best in charge of it. And so what's happening is it's going up the chain. It's taking 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is, to either get a yes, no answer or to still backtrack on it when that answer could have been resolved 3 or 4 months earlier. Like the solution is to teach them how to be effective and efficient at doing their job, to give them the authority and power and the freedom, the authority to do it, and then just get into work. And it's not going to get fixed overnight. Like,
Yeah.
no big problem is fixed overnight. It's take a long time. But
So just like empowerment.
Yeah.
It's almost like they don't feel empowered to make these decisions.
Well, they're not empowered. They're afraid they're going to get fired if they do X, Y, and Z. And so now everything is going through a checks and balance. Well, it jams everything up. You're not being efficient when you're not operating like effectively.
Have you seen a DA position anywhere in the U.S. that has worked efficiently, so that way we can kind of use that model here?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reality is this: it's always easy to play Monday morning quarterback, and that's why I'm saying like it's not going to be
Yeah,
fixed.
yeah.
I mean, there's going to be problems under any administration. Are people going to come back? When I win in November and take charge next year, are they going to say, oh well, Mark should have done X, Y, and Z? There's always going to be someone with critiques,
Right.
but the reality is, you know, from what I've seen, it doesn't matter whether it's a law firm, whether it's a business, it's not going to be successful. And in this case, success is holding criminals accountable, getting justice for victims, and helping to make Bexar County more safe. That's the goal, like, essentially. That's the business model of the DA's office. And you're not going to be successful if you don't have good leadership, good structure, good organization, and you don't empower your employees. I mean, it has to be that culture, that work ethic, that they want to come to work. They're excited. They're seeking justice. They're excited to help people, to hold people accountable, to make it a better place. And they're not there. I mean, I'll give you an example to backtrack. When you're talking about around the county, there's 3 prosecutors, at least that I know of, that quit. They still live here in Bexar County, and they're still prosecutors, but they're prosecutors in surrounding counties. So they quit the DA's office, the Bexar County DA's office, and now they're working in, Atascosa or Guadalupe County, but they still live here. Like that's the issue that we're having. We're having a morale, we're having a leadership, we're having a work issue in the office.
I mean, and do you feel like it's just because there's a constant revolving, I guess, boss, right? So like we don't have a stable DA. It's always changing constantly. So there's different leadership every single time. So I would assume that maybe in their eyes it's like, well, just play it safe and not get fired, kind of thing, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to be in that position too, if you think about it. To say, well, I don't want to get fired. I want to make sure the incoming DA is going to be happy, so we're going to just play it safe. So how do you help that? Like, how do you fix that though?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, actually. I think it's a twofold thing. Judge Reed was very efficient and very effective in a lot of ways. Call me biased. When my brother took over, I think he was very efficient and very effective in a lot of ways. I don't think a change of regime necessarily means that there's going to be backtracking, because this isn't our first rodeo, so to speak, right? Like, in theory, the approach to being a prosecutor doesn't change, right? Like the grand scheme approach, like some of it might get cleaned up, whether or not you want more, prison, or you're giving more probation, or you're giving more PTDs, or you're doing X, Y, and Z, but the goal is still the same, right? Like in Judge Reed, with Nico and myself, we all respected and honored law enforcement. We understood that they have a tough job, wanted to work with them. We wanted to enforce the laws, right? Like those things are consistent. The only thing that's outside of that equation is this last DA's office. To answer your question is this, the only real way I've analyzed it, and I'm not the first one to come up with it,
Yeah.
but um, throughout this country, there has been 12 or 15 Soros-backed DAs. And the one thing that's consistent with all those counties and all those systems is their crime went through the roof with the same policies, not enforcing the laws. This change of approach with working against and coming after law enforcement than working with them. And I'm not saying you don't hold them accountable. You got to hold everyone accountable. You hold yourself accountable, hold your own employees accountable. But you have to have this common sense approach to it. And so, what I've seen happen through the other administrations, if it's not changed, is going to keep happening here. I mean, that's at least my opinion of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is a if you don't have things change, I mean, there's a common denominator here, right? So, I mean, yeah, it's a slippery slope, and I kind of like what you said is, if you if you open up a door, or kind of like open Pandora's box, and to say, uh, to let more crime in, it's only going to get worse, right?
You made a joke that I was normal, but I think everything is kind of related, right? Like I don't think there's some kind of change of relationships. Like how I treat my kids, or the relationship dynamic is no different than me and you, or work relationship, romantic relationships. If my kids act up and I tell them, hey, I'm not going to do anything about it, do I think they're going to stop acting up? Do I think they're going to get worse? They're going to push the limits? And not just kids. I mean, I'm almost a grown-up adult. I'm a grown man, and it's human nature, right? Like we're programmed to test the limits,
right?
And so that doesn't mean you have to be, unreasonable and just a complete off the chart hard ass, and throw everyone in prison, everyone in jail, ruin everyone's record. And I'm not saying that's the approach, but you have to have consequences to actions. That's just a basic law. It's a law of science. It's a law of just relationships. It doesn't just magically change because the DA's office. You have to have consequences.
And also like some sort of program to help people while they're in jail too, because speaking from personally, we had somebody that we knew that was in jail and was given the option to either take these courses to better herself, or to just be free. I mean, a person that's in that situation, they're going to choose to just be free, right? To just leave rather than stay in jail, and to maybe try to learn something to help them better themselves. I know it's a decision that they make, but they're already not in the right frame of mind to begin with. You know what I mean?
Without a doubt.
Right. So I mean, it's it's like, would you rather have $1,000, get it right now, or $1 billion and you have to wait 30 years? You know what I mean? It's
no, I mean, you're right. The studies have shown that people would typically do that quick route.
Right.
And, but back to like common sense stuff is, just because a lot of people aren't going to better themselves. And, and I say a lot, I don't know if the numbers are more than half or less than half or whatnot, but, and then we can all agree there's a lot of people that aren't going to take the help that you're trying to give them. Does that mean you don't try and help people? Is the solution just to say, my hands are off? I don't think that's the solution. I think we've seen here in Bexar County, like I already said, and around the country, that doesn't work. And so I think the only solution is it's a lifelong struggle, right? You're always putting your hands in the mix. You're always trying to better people, the community, our neighborhoods, our county. That's what we're trying to do, right? And probably never get to a perfect world. We're never going to get to Eden, but it doesn't mean we don't try and fight for it.
Right. And in what kind of things have you done in the community to help, maybe to help the community in a sense? And I ask this because there are a lot of candidates that just come out to the community during campaign season to say, hey, I'm here, you know what I mean? But what are some things that you can say that you've done for the community to help, outside of the campaign?
I've been saying it from day one that, historically, I am what is typically wrong with the process, right? Like ever since I was 18 years old, I voted, and I voted in every election. I've always read, I've always been informed, and I was proud of that, right? Like I did my duty, and that was it. I never did anything else. I never had, discussions outside of my close-knit friends or close-knit families, right? Like you never talk about politics, you never talk about religion. That's the old saying. And I was really in my own bubble. And, really my life changed in 2015. So like, it's kind of a roundabout answer, but prior to 2015, I hadn't done anything. Yeah. I met my wife and I fell in love instantly. And she brought me back to God. And that process of bringing, I'm not trying to get on a soapbox, but that process of coming back to God, going back to church, I hadn't been 25 years, getting involved in our parishes. And then of course, when I met her, we had an 8-year-old daughter that I later adopted. And we've had 3 more. And having children really opened my eyes that, hey man, this is not just, like I said earlier, it's not bachelor, not just selfish mode. It's something beyond ourselves. And so what we started doing, aside from going to church, is, trying to lead by example with our daughter. We try to help people out when we can, whether it's homeless, whether it's people that are financially strapped or physically or emotionally or whatnot, and and she's taken that mantle herself, right? Volunteering at the food bank and whatnot. And are there more things we can do? Sure. And are we going to do more? Sure. And just like we said earlier, you always got to just keep striving and striving. There's 24 hours a day. You can't spend 24 hours, doing charity, but you can always do a little bit more. We always have an excuse for doing a little bit less, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Well, I applaud you for adopting, because we actually did that as well, and
It's a beautiful thing, man.
it is, and it's you you don't realize how difficult it is, and it's like, wow, uh, but you hope that more people would have the heart to adopt, um,
You're 100% right, because there's a lot of, I don't know if it's called stigma or, people have their own opinions of it, but, God, I make a joke that God has a sense of humor. My daughter is beautiful. She's blonde hair, blue eyes, physically looks nothing like me, but I feel bad for my wife because personality, she couldn't be more likely like me if we had the same DNA. And so, we both drive my wife crazy, um, but I've seen a change in her life, having a father and having that love and that support. It changes their lives. It changed my life. You know, Pardon my French, sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's one of those things that you look at it and from a different perspective, and you know there's also different journeys, right? So there's different journeys of adoption, but you know, some people are like, well, if you adopt a newborn, which we did, you're like, well, that's not really helping, but it is helping because that child could be in a different situation, right? Could
Yeah.
be, in a house that's not very suited for them, and they could be right in the system just along with their family, so
I'm into that, man.
yeah, so yeah.
You,
um
so like, little boy, little girl,
Little boy, yeah, it was our first.
how old is he now?
He's 5. Yeah,
You
5.
have, you have more children too?
The what?
Do you have more children also?
Yeah, so we adopted, and then a week later we found out we were pregnant, and so it was like God was like, all right, you guys wanted kids, so everybody around us was praying that we would have twins. We're like, no, 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 and of course, but yeah, they're 5. They're both 5 years old, um, so yeah, I'm glad that we have both of them because they're just like brother and sister. Like you couldn't tell anything, which we didn't plan it that way, but
Yeah.
but it's something that I hope a lot of people are able to do, especially if you're pro-life. If you're pro-life, I wish that people would more, go for adoption because it's the ultimate test right there.
Well, and it is, and that's one of the biggest arguments against being pro-life is, oh, you're a hypocrite, right? Like you care about the womb, but then the baby's born, and then you don't want to help, whether it's with financially or Medicaid or whatnot. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's a valid argument, but it's two separate arguments. It doesn't make the first one invalid. It just means, hey, people are hypocrites, or we have to work more at that as well.
Yeah.
But you're right, man. I mean,
It's not an easy thing, and it's
no.
spiritually, mentally, physically, monetarily draining, but it's definitely an experience. So
Yeah.
um, with your expert attorney opinion,
Uh-oh.
what
I got
is
you.
yeah, what is your most favorite restaurant in Bexar County? Small, it's like local restaurant.
What kind of food, man? Look, man.
Anything like
Well,
I know that's probably like
I'm
asking
200
who's your favorite
pounds.
artist.
I love to eat. So,
So tacos. Let's do tacos.
well, shoot. Okay, so I have two, I guess. I would say for sitting down and eating, I would go to El Rafa's off of Hildebrand. And if I'm just driving, my favorite is probably Taco Palenque.
Okay. I haven't heard of the first one, but
It's on Hildebrand outside of I-10. So if you go inside, like
is it close to like Rolando's?
so Rolando's is inside right there before like San Pedro and Blanco area. This is on the outside, like you going towards what's across street, Zarzamora, but it's outside of I-10. It's good, man. I mean, it tastes like home cooking.
And what about music? What's on your playlist right now?
Coco Melon.
I knew it. It's okay. I have my own separate playlist for the kids. It's carefully curated.
I had my own separate playlist in freaking 5 years, but it ranges from like Iron Maiden and Metallica to probably George Strait, Texas country, somewhere in there.
Okay. Any rap?
Actually, mostly just to my daughter. Not a lot though. I mean, whatever popular, but not, it's not like my go-to.
Have you heard of Christian rap?
I've never.
Oh man, you're missing out. It's
text it to.
Oh, I will. It's pretty amazing. That's and it's some hard hitting stuff too. Like there's some really good stuff. They talk about mental health. They talk about, but it's got a good beat, and you don't feel guilty about it. Yeah. So I mean, with everything going on with it seems like San Antonio is pushing more for artists to come in to San Antonio. Does that kind of excite you? Because hopefully we can get some more bigger names here, some bigger artists to come and play here.
Yes and no. I mean, selfishly, as someone that loves live music, yes. Generally speaking, as someone that loves Bexar County, I mean, I want us to grow and prosper. You know what I mean? Like, and so I want as much business and entertainment to come in and draw money and revenue for local businesses for our community. Not to go back to like stumping, but as the DA, no, not until we get a handle on things, because having more and wider problems coming in before we get the problems already established is just adding more to the plate. So I mean, it's kind of a double-edged yes and no.
I gotcha. It makes sense. All right. It's a very candid answer to that.
But it's the truth.
No, I know. So there was some bail reform done in 2019. Are you willing to push for more bail reform to give some people the ability to be released without bail, or do you think that was a wrong move?
No, I think that's the wrong move. And I'm not opposed to getting people out of jail. I'm not opposed to. I mean, hell no. I mean, I don't want someone waiting in there, especially because we have the presumption of innocence, right? But again, it's no different than saying that the same thing about not prosecuting crimes, right? Like, if you get released without any accountability, well, you got released on any accountability. Like, the solution, there isn't some quick sign on dotted line solution. Like, I don't think that fixes anything, right? It doesn't fix my overeating. It doesn't fix crime. You have to go in there. You just have to work harder and be more efficient at it. I mean, the reality is there's three things playing a role, right? The purpose of bond is not an instrument of oppression. It is to ensure that someone shows up for court, and also to balances out protecting the public welfare, right? Like, you don't want someone that you think is, stalking somebody to get released and go back and stalk them, or, assault them or hurt them. I'm just using it.
But do you think that there are some predatory bail bonds that just really go after, kind of like with the cash pawn, cash loan kind of things? Don't you think that there's some predatory issues though, like with those bail bondsmen, or no?
From my experience, I don't think so. Is it perfect? No. And have some people gotten screwed in situations? I'm sure. I mean, that happens with everything. As a general rule, I don't think it is. I mean, because the reality is this: if a bond is set and someone can't afford to bond out, the method and remedy is to approach the court and petition why, right? You do a motion to amend the condition of bond, or a motion to amend bond, so that you can reduce it. And so the judge can reduce at that point for whatever reason. But if you get arrested and just released, that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that there's not something to be done in there, but the current movement right now, I think is a massive mistake. You know, but I'm open ears. If someone has, something to the contrary, I'll listen to any argument or any, position and weigh the pros and cons. But from my experience and from what I've seen, as a defense attorney, I both legally and as a citizen, I don't think that there's an issue right now.
So when I hear, because I hear a lot of people's from like the left that, because I'm like you, I like to listen to both arguments because it's, there are some valid things. So some of them say that there are a lot of issues towards minorities, right? And it's already bad enough that a lot of it that happens are to the people are maybe poor or maybe uneducated, or they don't know a lot of these things or how these things work, and so they're already at a disadvantage, just like kind of like how our election system is a little bit. So what do you think? Do you believe some of that, or do you think that that's just
Well,
false?
I mean, without a doubt, money helps, right? At least when it comes to that, right? You hire a better attorney. You don't have to worry about, trying to come up with cash to pay the bondsman or to pay cash bond outright. So I think if someone says that, not having money makes it, or it's a lie that not having money makes it more difficult, I think that is not genuine either. But what they don't talk about is what's called a PR bond, right? Like a personal recognizance, where and they're paying 3% of the bond, typically in payments. Um, but because there's no collateral, right? It's personal recognizance. There's more restrictive measures on it, right? And now we're kind of branching into an area outside of the DA's office that probably goes more towards the judges and whatnot. But um, a PR bond is, at least in our profession, for clients, it's always been, man, it's the biggest pain in the butt, right? Because they make you report every week versus once a month. They typically would do, regular UAs, which are tests. They put a lot more restrictions on you because you don't have any money up front on it.
Mm.
And so, what the magic solution is ultimately, I don't know, other than having a DA that is proactive and working with the defense bar, right? So like, with if a court-appointed lawyer or a retained lawyer comes in and says, hey, so and so can't post bond, will you agree to reduce bond? Well, the DA can either agree to it, right? Look at the facts and say I agree to it, or they can say no, I'm not going to agree to it, and you have a hearing before the judge. Like, a lot of that, I think, comes from also from not communicating, not working well. You know, I believe the DA both needs to work, obviously, with law enforcement, like I said, but they also need to work with defense bar within reason, you know, because there's only two ways that you ultimately resolve a criminal case, right? You go to trial or you plead.
Mm.
That's it. And so if you don't work out things by pleas, everything is set for trial. Well, then if that happens, everything gets jammed up. And then now everything's getting dismissed because you can't work everything up. And if you're pleading everything out, that's probably a problem also. Like, it's got to be this realistic, pragmatic meeting in the middle. You know what I'm saying? I know I kind of went off tangent, but it's a lot more complicated than people want to think. They just talk about this big thing saying, oh, they don't have the money X, Y, and Z, or it's a minority, but it's a lot more complicated than that. The reality is the solution isn't going to be a black and white fix either way. It's not like, oh, we just shoot everything down, but you also don't just let everyone go. Like, you're dealing with people. You got to remember that. And so there's no cookie cutter for people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said before, there's no simple solution, but there's no one size fits all solution.
Yeah. I mean, if that's not a political answer, I don't know what is, but I mean,
um. You're
that's
right.
what you say something, but you're really saying nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. That's something that I've realized too, is that um a lot of times when people don't understand what all goes into it, you know, it's to get lost on it, right? You know,
Yeah.
when I ran for Texas House of Representatives, it was like, oh, what do you do? You're in city council? No, I'm not running for city council. You know, they don't understand what the position is, right? So with that question is, why is the district attorney's office so important? So for the people, just kind of break it down to say, why is this office so important to be really concerned about?
Yeah. Just like without even politicking, it's the DA is the conscience of the county. That's the best way of describing it. And what I mean by that is it is the chief law enforcement, right? So I'll give you an example of how it trickles down. If the DA stops prosecuting crimes, like we talked about, then what happens? Then law enforcement stops making those arrests, which has happened. Law enforcement, both SAPD, both BCSO, and officers throughout all the municipalities, they've stopped making arrests on all these types of crimes, and we didn't even hit them all. Or if someone is getting arrested and charged with a crime, and politically it's everyone's calling for blood, but the facts show that the person is innocent, or the evidence doesn't support it. It takes courage to say, hey, you know what? I know everyone's calling for blood, but the facts aren't there, right? It's easy to go with the mob mentality. It takes courage to stick to it. And that's what the DA ultimately has to be able to do, is say, look, don't reelect me. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do what's going to make Bexar County safe. I'm going to do what's going to help people. I'm going to do what's going to hold criminals accountable, period. And that's why this is so important. I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but the reality is this. And if I tell my oldest daughter, I said, baby, it's not a matter of if something happens to you or one of your friends. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Yeah. And when that happens, we want to hold them accountable if we can, and we want to make you whole and make them whole if we can. And that's it. And then, of course, the last one is prevent it if we can, right? But yeah, it's all tied together. That's why it's so important. It's part of the cycle to help the community, to protect us.
Good point. Good point.
Eric, you got my vote now,
man. With domestic violence that's on the rise, which we saw after COVID, what are some items that you believe the DA's office will be able to help with, if any?
So a couple. One of the biggest problems that I think people glance over, and aside from the DA's office, is there's a psychological component. Like there's an issue, I think, when there's a crime of violence, and there's a crime of violence against someone you love or someone that depends upon you. Like it's a whole different level, right? So that's an issue unto itself. With regards to the DA's office, the biggest complaints that I've heard from both victim advocates and DAs now is it's not efficient. So what I mean by that is this: is an allegation is made that so and so assaulted somebody else, right? And from the time of that charge until the time we go to court, a lot of things can happen, right? And the more time that passes, there's a lot of time for those things to occur. And what I mean by that is like there's often financial issues. Like stereotypically, the aggressor is usually the money maker, or that money is necessary for their livelihood. And so that becomes an issue. They often have kids, or there's a relationship issue. That plays a role. And that's important because one of the biggest problems we see are our complainants, our victims, changing their story or not wanting to prosecute. After the dust settles and the emotions wear off, they start realizing, hey, here's the reality of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And those are issues that people don't, I don't think people really address, right? They go on the big ticket stuff, but that's the practical matter. And that the only way to try and approach that, I think, is to be, again, more efficient in your office. So you're handling these cases, you're working more quickly, and then have an office in place where you're making contact, immediately. It's almost like running for office, right? Like, what do they say? Like face-to-face is the best, best way to get a vote. Like, knocking on a door and talking with somebody. Well, contact is the only way. You have to have contact because one, it keeps that relationship open, and two, you have a pulse on, are they starting to waver? Are they starting to recant? And of course, the facts come up to show that, X, Y, and Z, but those there's not a simple solution, but it has to be addressed because it's a problem. I would call it a pandemic. And like you said, it's gotten worse as we've locked ourselves down and been cooped up with our families and our close ones. Tensions rise and violence occurs, and we have to stop it, because that's another crime that I think, I'm not gonna get into sociology, but I think that's also learned as well. I think it's pretty,
Oh yeah.
pretty consistently proved that, you
Right. Well,
got to stop that early on.
yeah. Well, there was a video. I don't know if you saw. There was a video of some kid going to this neighbor's house with like a whip, it looked like a switch, and like beating on this door, and it was a black family and it was a white family, and they were saying that he was saying all these racial things, and it was like a little kid, like maybe 7 years old, and it's like, well, where do they learn these things, right?
Yeah.
It comes from the family, right? So if you don't have like a strong family, or a strong role model, especially like a father figure, you're put in a disadvantage sometimes. You know what I mean?
I agree with
now,
that.
now, granted, I grew up without a father, but I I did as much as I could to change that trajectory of where I could have gone.
Yeah.
And luckily I'm not where statistically I should be, right? So, but yeah, I just think it definitely falls where this stuff is learned from, you know?
Yeah.
Something that's kind of, I know it's not part of the DA's office, but do you think with what Windcrest is doing with not when they're pulling over people, but not having a contact face to face with a driver, do you think that will help police officers in direct to be a little bit more safer, I guess, so to say?
I
So
mean,
there's not the escalation point, you know?
I mean, the DA is the chief of law enforcement. We're still not peace officers, right? We're not pulling over people and doing traffic stops and putting ourselves in harm's way in that regards. But I still think that, and I think most of my friends and most police officers would agree that, you can't police, you can't do your job without that face to face, without that. Just like I said, with the DA's office getting your hands dirty, no pun intended. I know there's a lot of accusations and whatnot, but I don't think you can do that job remotely, right? At least not efficiently, not effectively. One of the things they're taught during the personal encounter area of their investigation is, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? Are they consistent? And all that plays a role. How do you do that without contact? How do you do that? Again, I think that it ties back to, weak DAs that don't support them, and the public as well. Like, sure, have police officers done horrible things? I'm sure. But how many millions and millions and millions of police officers are there? If you're going to try and tell me that as a whole they're bad, well, then we would see a whole lot worse. You know what I mean? Like, you don't crucify them all for the minority.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think
I saw that in the military. There was quite a few bad apples in the military that did stuff and treated the nationals, poorly, but that wasn't all of us.
Yeah.
It is difficult, and you have, yes, like you said, there needs to be accountability for sure, but how do you make those how do you make that accountability set up so that way both parties are okay with it?
Well, I mean, the problem is that again, the solutions that have been proposed have been ones that I think are sound bites to appease an ideology. And what I mean by that is yeah, they're focusing on law enforcement, but what about the flip side? What about the encounters, right? And I'm not saying anyone deserves to be shot or choked or whatnot, but the one thing that is usually pretty consistent is not following the commands, right? You just stop, pull over, or whatnot. And I'm not saying that justifies X, Y, and Z, but like you talked about with the upbringing, like there's two sides to the equation. And I don't care what you do with law enforcement, you're still not going to fix it if you don't address this side, right? And you can't just demonize one and say, oh, you're the whole problem. Well, that doesn't work, right? Like, whether it's not doing, police chases now. Okay, well now they just get away. I mean, I'm not saying that there's time and a place for that, but you can't have a black and white response to something as complicated, as dangerous, as important as law enforcement, as human relationships. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and there are several jobs like like I was telling you earlier, my job. There's no black and white with it. There's a case by case kind of basis. So there's different variables. I mean, some things you react a certain way, and some the other. But yeah, definitely understand what you're saying with that. Um, what kind of changes do you think you can bring to the DA's office?
In what way? I mean, aside from the organization and the structure,
Uh,
or
let's
just
say
kind
let's
of,
say the culture. Let's say the culture.
I mean, the culture would be this. I mean, is the people that I know that are there now and the ones that have left. Like I said, they're scared to lose their jobs and they're demoralized, and that's not like blowing smoke, right? And you're not going to do your job well, and both if you're demoralized, if you're not happy, and you're not going to be effective and efficient at it. So changing the ideology within the DA's office itself, leading them, guiding them, mentoring them, being one with them to help actually try and make a difference versus just, checking off the list to, for reelection or for election or whatnot is issue number one. And the second is actually talking with the community, right? If you're here to protect the community, right, and enforce the laws of the community and enforce the interest, how can you do that from your ivory tower up in the justice center? Like, if you're in your own little circle where everyone's, only encountering the same things, then you're not going to know what's wrong. Like I always tell people, you don't know what you don't know. You have to get out into communities and see, the West Side has different interests than the South Side and the East Side, rural versus urban. Like you said, black, white, brown, Asian, whatever it is, like money, not money. I mean, everyone has different interests, cultures, and pressing concerns, right? Doesn't mean you can fix them all, but you won't even know what their issue is if you don't even know what the problem is.
Right.
So
It's the finding the root cause.
yeah, I'm trying to at least, open dialogue.
Right. Right. And it's hard in this political climate.
Well, I mean,
Nobody wants.
it's hard if you're worried about the backlash. If your goal is just to do it because it's right and say, like I tell people, hey, if you don't like what I'm doing, vote me out in 4 years, but I think you're gonna be happy with what I do. I'm just gonna stick to the job and try and do what's right, period.
Yeah, that's understandable. Just last question. What is a frequent establishment that you like to have? Well, not establishment, but like what? Ooh, not the question I wanted.
Okay.
What do you enjoy about San Antonio?
Like what I love.
And as far as like with the community itself.
Um, just, and I hope it never changes, although it probably is. I love the big little feel to it. You know what I mean? Like I've always bragged that Bexar County is the greatest county in the greatest state, the greatest country. People are like, oh, you're crazy. You're just a stupid Texan. And I'm like, no, man, whether you're West Coast, East Coast, North and South, the one thing about Bexar County, it still hasn't changed, right? You can be in line at HEB, strike up a conversation with somebody. You still see people opening doors and holding doors and giving up their seats for the elderly or a pregnant woman or whatnot. Like we still strike up conversations with strangers and genuinely ask, hey, Eric, how was your day, bro? Not just, like we still have this like small town feel and vibe. And I think it's from the culture. I think it's from, largely the Hispanic culture and our faith based. And I don't want to lose that, we're what 1.5 million or something like that.
Yeah.
And how many people, I'm sure you've had this as well. Do you meet somebody and you realize, hey, we know so-and-so, right?
Right.
Like it's amazing how interconnected we are.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that charm that makes us unique. I don't want to be, this urban city where we're just robots and we see someone and don't pull over to help them change a tire or want to help people. Like that's beautiful. Like I want to cherish that. I want to protect that if possible.
Right. Yeah, definitely for sure. So what are some last quotes that you want to say, or anything that you want to say regarding your campaign, or to the people itself?
Just a short version is this, like we talked about earlier, this is not a Republican Democrat issue. This race is about law and order. It's about bringing back accountability in the office. It's about the rule of law, and it's about helping make Bexar County safe again, period. I'm asking for voters to vote for me and to help fight and work with me to struggle to get that done.
Okay. And how can people get a hold of you?
So I have a website, marclahood.com. Our office is at my law office on 4014 McCullough. We got Facebook, we have the internet, we have email, info at Marc LaHood, and that's Mark with a C, .com, and just reach out. I'd be more than happy if someone wants to sit down and talk. I might be busy, but it might take a day or two, but I'll make the time. I want to hear from people. I want to know what they think, whether it's good or bad. I don't care. Be free to disagree, but just I want to hear it. I want to know, and I want to make it better. Awesome. So that's it.
Well, I appreciate you for coming on, and just thank you everybody for joining. We always want to make sure that we vote with your conscience, not just vote for people who tell you who to vote for. I'm really a stickler for not voting by party. I really like to be able to look at all the sides and look at the person itself, and we should all be doing that too. So just remember that. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you for coming on. And good luck. Good luck on your campaign. And again, if anybody wants to reach out to him, you can reach out to him. But thank you guys for joining. Have an awesome day. All right.
Thank you, brother. Take care.